What if I told you that in 1947, an architect built a house that continued building itself? What if I told you that every morning, new rooms appeared overnight, drawn into existence by invisible hands? And what if I told you that the house didn't stop building until it had consumed everyone who lived inside it? Tonight, we're diving into one of the most disturbing architectural mysteries of the 20th century. A story so bizarre that it was buried by authorities, erased from public records, and forgotten by time itself. This is the story of the Hartwell House in Salem, Oregon, and the architect who made a deal that would cost him everything. Theodore Hartwell was a brilliant architect, but brilliance often walks hand in hand with obsession. After losing his wife and twin daughters in a house fire, Theodore became consumed with a single, impossible idea: building a house that could protect its inhabitants from any danger. A house that could adapt, grow, and shield its residents from the cruel randomness of the world. But Theodore's grief had twisted his genius into something darker. He began studying ancient architectural texts, delving into forgotten building techniques that predated modern construction by millennia. In the basement of his temporary residence, neighbors reported seeing strange blueprints that seemed to move on their own, lines shifting and rearranging themselves when no one was looking. The construction of the Hartwell house began in the spring of 1940. Workers reported unusual incidents from day one. Tools would be found in different locations each morning. Measurements that were perfect one day would be completely wrong the next, as if the foundation itself had shifted overnight. 3 workers quit in the first month, claiming they could hear whispering coming from within the walls. Even though the house had no plumbing or electrical work completed yet, Theodore dismissed their concerns. He was so close to completing his masterpiece, his sanctuary against tragedy. But what he had actually created was something far more sinister. The first night Theodore moved into the unfinished house, something extraordinary and terrifying happened. He woke to the sound of pencils scratching against paper. Following the sound, he discovered his drafting table in the study, where new blueprints were being drawn by invisible hands. Room after room appeared on the paper, detailed down to the smallest measurement. As if the house itself was designing its own expansion, Theodore should have been terrified. Instead, he was fascinated. He watched as the phantom architect worked through the night, adding rooms he had never conceived: a nursery identical to his daughter's room, a kitchen that perfectly matched his deceased wife's preferences, a master bedroom that seemed designed to house not just himself, but the family he had lost. By morning, these rooms had materialized, not just as blueprints, but as actual, physical spaces. Walls that hadn't existed the night before now stood solid and complete. Electrical work had been finished in rooms that had no electrical plans. Plumbing flowed to bathrooms that had appeared overnight. Theodore should have run. Instead, he invited his brother William to stay with him, eager to share his miraculous discovery. William was skeptical until he witnessed the phenomenon himself. On his second night in the house, William watched as the invisible architect drew blueprints for a library, complete with built-in shelves and a reading nook. By dawn, the library existed, filled with books that neither brother had ever owned. But the books were wrong. They were volumes that had belonged to Theodore's wife, books that had been destroyed in the fire. When William opened one, it crumbled to ash in his hands, and for just a moment, both brothers could smell smoke. That's when they realized the house wasn't just building itself, it was rebuilding Theodore's past, recreating the life that had been taken from him. But the dead cannot be reconstructed, only imitated. And the house's imitations grew more disturbing with each passing night. The phantom architect began drawing people into the blueprints. Theodore would wake to find detailed floor plans that included not just rooms, but the exact positions where his wife and daughters would stand, where they would sleep, where they would play. The house was trying to resurrect his family, but resurrection through architecture creates only hollow shells of the living. On the 7th night, Theodore woke to find a woman standing in the kitchen. She looked exactly like his wife, Sarah, but when she turned to greet him, her face was blank, featureless, like an architectural sketch that had never been completed. She spoke in a voice that sounded like wind through empty walls, asking him to come to bed, to pretend that nothing had ever changed. William found Theodore the next morning, sitting in the kitchen, staring at empty air, and carrying on a conversation with someone who wasn't there. When William tried to convince his brother that he was alone, Theodore became violent, insisting that his family had returned, that the house had brought them back. The house continued to grow. New blueprints appeared every night, and new rooms materialized every dawn. But these additions were becoming increasingly impossible. Staircases that led to nowhere, doors that opened onto solid walls, rooms that existed in the blueprints but could not be found in the actual house. The Phantom Architect was losing its grip on reality, just as Theodore had. William tried to get his brother to leave, but Theodore refused. The house had become his entire world, and his entire world was slowly becoming impossible. He spent his days wandering through rooms that shouldn't exist, having conversations with family members who weren't there, living in a structure that was part building, part delusion, and entirely dangerous. The end came on a cold October night. William, who had been staying at a nearby hotel, returned to the house to check on his brother. What he found defied all logic and reason. The house had grown beyond its original footprint, sprawling across the entire lot and into the neighboring properties, but more impossibly, it seemed to extend upward and downward beyond what the laws of physics should allow. Inside, William found hundreds of rooms, all identical to spaces from Theodore's destroyed home, kitchen after kitchen, all exactly like Sarah's kitchen, nursery after nursery, all perfect replicas of his daughter's room. And in the center of this impossible maze, Theodore sat at his drafting table, furiously drawing blueprints for rooms that already existed, trapped in an endless cycle of architectural resurrection. The Phantom Architect was still working, but now it was drawing over its own work, creating rooms within rooms, houses within houses, realities layered upon realities until the entire structure existed in a state of architectural impossibility. William tried to reach his brother, but Theodore no longer recognized him. In Theodore's mind, William was an intruder in the perfect world the house had rebuilt. Theodore had become part of the house's delusion, another impossible element in an impossible structure. William fled and returned with authorities. But when they arrived the next morning, the house had vanished. Not destroyed, not collapsed, simply gone. In its place stood an empty lot with a single foundation stone. Carved into that stone were hundreds of tiny architectural drawings, blueprints for rooms that had never existed, signed by an architect who had ceased to be real. Theodore Hartwell was never found. Neither were the hundreds of blueprints that should have documented his impossible house. Official records show that no house was ever constructed at that address. No permits were ever issued, and no architect named Theodore Hartwell ever lived in Salem, Oregon. But sometimes, late at night, residents of the surrounding area report seeing lights in windows that aren't there, glimpses of a massive house that exists only in peripheral vision. And occasionally, very occasionally, someone finds a piece of paper on their doorstep, covered with architectural drawings in Theodore's distinctive hand. Blueprints for rooms in their own homes that don't exist yet, but might, if they're foolish enough to build them. The Phantom Architect, it seems, is still working. The Hartwell house represents more than just an impossible architectural anomaly. It stands as a testament to the dangerous intersection between grief and obsession, between the desire to rebuild what we've lost and the reality that some things should remain buried. Theodore Hartwell thought he could architect his way out of tragedy, that he could build a structure strong enough to house his grief and skilled enough to resurrect his dead. Instead, he created something that consumed not just him, but the very concept of reality around him. The next time you're lying in bed at night and you hear unexplained sounds in your walls, the next time a room in your house seems slightly different, then you remember it. Ask yourself this question: are you living in a house that was built by human hands, or are you living in a house that's still building itself? And if you ever find mysterious blueprints on your doorstep, whatever you do, don't follow them. Some architects should never be commissioned, and some houses should never be built. The phantom architect is always looking for a new project, and the next house he designs might be yours.